Aaron Voss had always been someone who liked technology, but when it came to companionship, he was a little more reserved. After years of living alone in a small, cluttered apartment on the edge of the city, the young engineer found himself craving something more than just machines to talk to. His job at the spaceport kept him busy, but there was always a feeling of emptiness when he returned home. One late night, while browsing a deep space marketplace, Aaron stumbled upon something that caught his eye. An ad for a smart pet. It was advertised as an advanced AI-enhanced companion. An animal designed to be both a pet and a friend, easy to take care of, and perfect for someone like him. The idea of a pet that didn't require constant attention or walkies sounded perfect. Maybe it was time to try something different. He clicked the Buy Now button and waited eagerly for the package to arrive. When the day came, the delivery was strange. The package wasn't big, but it was oddly shaped, more like a smooth metallic egg than anything else. Aaron was puzzled. The ad hadn't shown anything like this. Curious and a little confused, he carefully cut open the wrapping. To his surprise, there was no pet inside a cage or box, just the egg-shaped pod, a strange object that seemed to hum with a soft, pulsing light. After a few moments, the pod clicked open with a soft sound, revealing a small, humanoid figure curled up inside. At first glance, Aaron thought it was some kind of artificial life form, a miniature, robotic alien, maybe something built to mimic a real creature. But this was no machine. The small being had delicate blue skin that shimmered faintly under the soft lights of the room. Her hair, silver and shimmering like the surface of a moonlit lake, framed her face. Her eyes, large, round, and glowing silver, stared up at him with a sense of intelligent curiosity, like she was studying him just as much as he was studying her. She blinked a few times, then with a soft voice, said, "Hello." Aaron blinked in surprise. This wasn't what he had expected. He checked the instruction manual again, but it didn't make much sense. It mostly spoke about how to care for the creature, feed it, and make sure it stayed happy. But what he was looking at was clearly not an animal. She wasn't some pet that would curl up on the couch or chase a ball. She was something else entirely. The little alien girl, if that's even what she was, sat up and smiled at him. "I am Lyra. I am not a pet," she said, her voice clear but trembling slightly. Aaron's heart raced. What in the stars was going on here? He was expecting some sort of cute, cuddly pet, something he could feed and enjoy the company of. But this was something far beyond that. He found himself staring at the small alien girl, trying to process what he was seeing. She wasn't just a thing to care for. She was alive. Alive, with thoughts and feelings of her own. She looked up at him again, her glowing eyes full of wonder. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Aaron's mind raced. Could this be a hoax? Some kind of elaborate trick? But then again, who would go to such extremes for a prank? No, this wasn't a joke. Lyra was real, and she was no pet in any sense of the word. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into, but one thing was certain. His life was never going to be the same again. As the days passed, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that everything about his new companion was wrong, yet utterly fascinating. Lyra, as she had introduced herself, had made it clear from the start that she wasn't a pet. Aaron hadn't really taken her seriously at first, dismissing it as some kind of strange programming glitch or misunderstanding. After all, she looked like a child. A tiny alien girl with delicate blue skin and silver hair. Yet the more time he spent with her, the clearer it became that she wasn't anything like the pet he had imagined. The first few days were a blur of confusion. Lyra was incredibly intelligent, picking up new words and phrases within hours of arriving. She understood complex concepts, asking questions that made Aaron realize just how much she already knew, despite her strange appearance. One morning, while Aaron was sipping coffee, Lyra asked, "What is the purpose of this place?" "The planet. the sky. Her eyes shone with curiosity, as though she had been waiting for someone to explain it to her. Aaron sat there, staring at her for a long moment. It wasn't just her words that threw him off. It was the way she said them. There was a depth in her voice, a sense of understanding beyond what someone, or something, of her apparent age could possess. She wasn't a mindless creature who only wanted to play or eat. She was a person, with thoughts and emotions, and perhaps a tragic history that she couldn't fully remember. That night, while they were sitting together, Lyra revealed something that took Aaron by surprise. "I wasn't meant to be here," she said quietly, her silver eyes dimming as though the memory itself pained her. "I was taken. I don't know who did it, but I remember. I remember a different place. My people were there." Aaron's heart sank as he listened to her. This wasn't a simple mix-up in the marketplace. This was something far darker. Lyra's memories were fractured, bits and pieces scattered like fragments of a broken puzzle. She remembered being somewhere else, far away from Earth. Somewhere that sounded alien and beautiful, a place full of people just like her real people. But the rest of the story was locked away, hidden by what seemed like a wall in her mind. Aaron didn't know how to process this information. A part of him wanted to call the authorities, report that he had an alien child in his home. But something in his gut told him that wouldn't end well. He couldn't turn her in. Not when she was so clearly scared, not when she was begging for answers. Her glowing eyes pleaded with him, silently asking him to help her, to uncover the truth of who she was and where she came from. That night, Aaron decided he couldn't just sit back. He couldn't ignore the fact that this wasn't just some weird pet. This was a living being in need of protection. As he lay awake in bed, he thought about the implications. He was tangled in something much bigger than himself now. If Lyra had been taken from her people, what had happened to them? Were there others like her? And why was she here, on Earth, with no memory of how she had gotten there? The next morning, as he looked at her while she played with the holographic toys he bought for her, Aaron realized something that shocked him. He had grown attached to her in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't just an alien or an experiment. She was someone who needed him, someone who had nowhere else to go. The connection between them was real, and for better or worse, he couldn't turn back now. He had to find out who she was. He had to find her people. With that decision, everything changed. From that moment forward, Aaron's life wouldn't be about tech and machines. It would be about saving someone who had no one else to turn to. Determined to help Lyra, Aaron began digging into the strange circumstances surrounding her arrival. He spent days poring over information on the dark web, searching for any clues about where she might have come from or who could have sold her. What he uncovered was far worse than he had expected. It didn't take long for Aaron to learn that Neurogenis, the company responsible for the Smart Pet program, was not the harmless tech firm it claimed to be. In fact, the more Aaron uncovered, the darker the truth became. Neurogenis wasn't just creating artificially intelligent pets. They were trafficking intelligent alien species, engineering them for sale as pets, and erasing their memories. Their goal wasn't companionship. It was control, profit, and manipulation. Lyra, it seemed, was one of many. The discovery made Aaron sick to his stomach. He couldn't believe it at first. How could a company get away with something so monstrous? But the evidence was undeniable. People, both human and alien, were being abducted from distant planets, their memories wiped, and their identities erased. They were then sold as smart pets to wealthy buyers across the galaxy. And now, Lyra was one of their victims. Aaron's heart sank as he realized the scale of what he was dealing with. Lyra wasn't just a lost child. She was a living being whose life had been torn apart by a ruthless corporation. And the worst part was that he had no idea how deep this went. He had assumed she was simply a confused alien. But now he knew the truth. She was part of something much larger, something far more dangerous. The deeper Aaron dug, the more he realized how little the galaxy cared for the lives of alien species like Lyra's. Her kind, The Cypherans had been a peaceful race with their own thriving civilization before they were wiped out in a violent attack. A memory Lyra was just starting to recover. But it was clear that Neurogenis hadn't stopped there. They had found a way to harness the power of her people, genetically manipulating them to serve as pets, or worse, tools. The more Iran read, the more his anger grew. These weren't just innocent creatures. They were beings with history, culture, and value. Iran couldn't just sit idly by anymore. He couldn't pretend that his life would go back to normal after learning the truth. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized the danger that came with helping Lyra. Neurogenis was everywhere. Its influence reached deep into the galactic underworld, with a network of bounty hunters and enforcement officers on the lookout for anyone who tried to hide or protect the assets they sold. To make matters worse, Aaron started noticing things around him. Little details that didn't seem right. His home was being watched. There were strange figures lurking near his apartment, and every time he tried to go out, he felt eyes on him. It was clear that he was being monitored, but by whom? Was it someone from Neurogenis, or were they closer than he realized? Lyra, for her part, seemed unaware of the danger. She still spoke of her lost people, but in her heart, she felt a sense of gratitude toward Aaron. She had begun to trust him, seeing him not as a stranger, but as her protector. And that was the problem. Aaron was no longer just a guy who bought a weird pet on a whim. He was now tangled up in a web of lies, corruption, and violence. Neurogenis wouldn't let them go without a fight. As Aaron stared at the computer screen in his small apartment, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. He couldn't turn back. He had to protect Lyra, and in doing so, he was about to uncover a conspiracy that would shake the galaxy to its core. The truth had never been more dangerous, but Aaron was ready to face whatever came next. For Lyra, and for all the others like her, he couldn't let this nightmare continue. Aaron had barely finished researching the terrible truth about Neurogenis when the first sign of danger appeared. It wasn't a warning or a subtle hint. It was a direct threat. Late one night, as Aaron was sitting in his dimly lit living room with Lyra, a loud, sudden crash shook the apartment door. He jumped to his feet, heart pounding in his chest, and Lyra's glowing silver eyes widened in fear. "Who is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Aaron quickly scanned the room, trying to think of a way to escape, but there was no time. The door burst open with a violent force, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It was a tall man, dressed in dark armor that gleamed under the light, his face hidden behind a helmet. The man's movements were sharp and efficient, like he had done this many times before. "Captain Dorn," Aaron muttered under his breath. He had read about him in the files he'd uncovered. Captain Dorn was one of the top enforcers for Neurogenis, a ruthless, cybernetically enhanced soldier known for his cold efficiency. He didn't look like someone who would hesitate to hurt anyone in his way. Before Aaron could react, Dorn's voice cut through the air, harsh and commanding. "I've come for the asset. You've been warned." His voice was cold, but there was an unmistakable authority in it. His hand reached for a weapon at his side, a sleek, high-tech gun that looked designed for one purpose only: elimination. Aaron's heart raced. He had to act, and fast. He grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her toward the back door of the apartment. "Run," he shouted, panic rising in his throat. They didn't have much of a chance against someone like Captain Dorn, not without help. The two of them sprinted through the narrow hallway, Lyra's small feet barely keeping up as they darted past walls and doors. Aaron's mind was racing. How could this have happened so quickly? He had just started to uncover the truth about Neurogenis, and now here was Dorn, a highly trained killer sent to collect Lyra. They'd reached the back door, but as Aaron opened it, he saw a squad of heavily armed soldiers waiting outside. They had anticipated his move. Lyra gasped, her silver eyes wide with fear, and for a moment, Aaron thought they were done for. But then he saw something, a narrow alleyway behind the building, leading into the deeper parts of the city. It was their only chance. Without a second thought, Aaron pushed Lyra toward the alley, ordering her to run as fast as she could. Go, 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 he urged. They darted into the shadows, their footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls. Behind them, Dorn's voice echoed through the night. Catch them. No mercy. Aaron's heart thudded in his chest as they ran, his legs burning from the effort. He could hear the soldiers getting closer, the sound of their boots pounding on the ground. Dorn's voice was relentless, commanding his men to move faster, and Aaron knew that if they didn't find a way to lose them soon, they would be caught. As they ran through the twisting streets, Aaron's mind raced for a plan. He had no weapon, no escape route, nothing but the hope that the alleyway would somehow lead to safety. He glanced over at Lyra, her face filled with terror, but also determination. "We'll make it," Aaron whispered, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. The chase continued, but the alley seemed to stretch on forever, and the soldiers weren't far behind. Every turn they made only seemed to bring more of them into view. Just when Aaron thought they had nowhere left to run, they rounded a corner and saw a small, narrow door hidden behind some crates. Without thinking, he yanked open the door and shoved Lyra inside. He followed quickly, slamming the door behind them just as a burst of gunfire rang out from the soldiers. They were safe, for now. Aaron's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, his mind still racing. He had no idea what to do next, but one thing was clear. They were no longer just hiding from Neurogenis. They were running for their lives, and the hunt was only just beginning. Aaron and Lyra spent the next few days hiding in the shadows, constantly on the move to avoid the watchful eyes of Neurogenis. They had barely escaped the clutches of Captain Dorn and his squad, but Aaron knew this was only temporary. They couldn't keep running forever. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to dig deeper into Lyra's mysterious past. That was when Aaron decided to take a risk. He contacted Sci-fi, a skilled hacker known for working with the galaxy's underground resistance movements. She had the reputation of being able to crack into nearly any system, and if anyone could help him uncover the truth about Lyra's origins, it was Syra. It took several attempts before Syra agreed to meet. Her location wasn't easy to find. She operated out of an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The place was hidden behind layers of digital firewalls and encrypted signals, but after Aaron sent a carefully worded message, she finally responded. When Aaron and Lyra arrived at the meeting point, they were greeted by Syra, a tall woman with short, spiky hair and a mischievous smile. Her eyes gleamed with intelligence, but there was a hard edge to her, a reminder that she wasn't someone to be crossed. "You must be Aaron, and the little lady must be Lyra," Syra said, her voice smooth but guarded. "Come on in. We don't have much time before Neurogenis figures out where you are." Inside, the warehouse was filled with old computer terminals, cables snaking across the floor, and glowing monitors casting eerie light across the dark room. Syra led them to a corner where a large holographic interface flickered to life. She gestured for Aaron and Lyra to sit, then plugged a small device into the terminal. "I'll get to work on cracking Lyra's genetic signature," Syra said, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. "I might not be able to recover all her memories, but if there's anything in there about where she comes from, I'll find it." Aaron nodded, but Lyra seemed more nervous than ever. She sat next to him, her silver eyes wide as she glanced around the room. Aaron could tell she didn't fully understand the situation, but he could feel her trust in him. She was scared, but she was also starting to believe that Aaron would do whatever it took to help her. As Syra worked, Aaron took a deep breath and tried to reassure Lyra. "We're going to figure this out, Lyra. You're not alone in this anymore." Lyra looked up at him, a small smile appearing on her face. "Thank you. I don't remember everything, but I feel like I'm supposed to be somewhere, with people who look like me." Aaron squeezed her hand, determined to help her find those people, no matter what. After several tense minutes, Syra let out a soft whistle. "Got it. There's a trace in her genetic code, something that links her to a planet called Sci-fi. She turned to Iran. It's an old, almost forgotten planet. I've heard whispers of it, but no one's seen it in centuries. According to the data, it was destroyed by an unknown enemy, but some survivors escaped. Lyra might be one of those survivors. Iran's heart skipped a beat. He had always suspected there was more to Lyra's story, but hearing this was like a punch to the gut. Sci-fi was a lost world. Its people thought extinct. Yet Lyra was here, alive and somehow connected to it. Syra continued. From what I can gather, Lyra's memories were altered, likely to keep her from remembering her true identity. She was part of a diplomatic mission, but something went wrong. The records are hazy, but if she was sent to Earth, it wasn't by accident. Lyra's eyes widened, as though pieces of a puzzle were starting to fall into place. Aaron could see the confusion and the realization in her expression. But why? Why would they do this to me? She whispered. Aaron didn't have an answer. He wished he could tell her everything, make her feel safe. But the truth was, the more they uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. Neurogenis was still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had Lyra back. We'll figure it out, Aaron promised. But right now, we need to stay hidden. We can't risk being found before we know more. Syra glanced up from the terminal and gave them a reassuring look. You're on the right path. I'll keep digging, but for now, you need to be careful. Neurogenis is already looking for you, and they won't rest until they have her back. Aaron nodded. He knew the stakes were higher than ever. But with this new information, they had a chance. Lyra wasn't just some random alien. She was part of something much bigger. And Aaron wasn't going to stop until he helped her reclaim her past. With the discovery of Lyra's connection to the lost planet Sci-fi, Aaron knew their lives were about to change forever. They couldn't stay in the city any longer. Staying hidden in one place would only give Neurogenis more time to track them down. With Syra's help, Aaron had managed to secure fake identities and a way off the planet. But they needed to move fast. The clock was ticking, and every day they spent in the open brought them closer to being caught. Aaron and Lyra made their way to a remote spaceport on the outskirts of the city, one of the few places that still offered discreet, untraceable travel. The journey would be dangerous, but they had no choice. As they approached the spaceport, Aaron's thoughts raced. He was constantly on edge, watching every person they passed, wondering if someone recognized them or was part of the Neurogenis network. Lyra, walking silently beside him, seemed unusually calm. Her silvery eyes had grown more focused lately, her memories starting to return in fragments. She remembered more about Sci-fi now. Her home, her people, the peaceful life she had before everything was destroyed. There were flashes of images in her mind. Tall, crystalline cities, lush green landscapes, and the soft hum of energy flowing through the air. But with those memories also came fear, the images of destruction, of ships in the sky, and the darkness that had swallowed her world. I remember the feeling of being lost, Lyra said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The pain of everything breaking apart. Aaron placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. He understood. The more Lyra remembered, the harder it seemed for her to process the truth. She wasn't just a lost child. She was a survivor of a destroyed world, and the weight of that was crushing. But at least now, they knew what they were fighting for. Lyra deserved to know her past, and Aaron would do whatever it took to help her find it. As they reached the spaceport, Aaron couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. It was a busy, chaotic place, filled with travelers, smugglers, and all sorts of unsavory characters. It was the perfect place for them to blend in, but it was also a perfect place for a trap. He scanned the crowd, his senses on high alert. Every noise, every person walking too close, made him more paranoid. They were just about to board the ship when a familiar voice cut through the air. Aaron. Aaron froze, his heart skipping a beat. It was Captain Dorn, standing near the docking bay with two other soldiers by his side. His cold, mechanical eyes locked onto Iran's, and the deadly enforcer didn't waste any time. "You think you can run from us?" Dorn said with a sneer, his voice dripping with menace. "You've made a mistake coming here. Now you're going to pay for it." Iran's pulse raced, but he didn't hesitate. He grabbed Lyara's hand, pulling her toward the ship. "Get on. Now." The soldiers were closing in, but before they could make a move, the ship's engines roared to life. Iran had already paid for a quick getaway, and the ship was ready to take off. They didn't have time for a fight. As the ship ascended, Iran glanced back at the spaceport, his stomach sinking. Captain Dorn and his men had been too close. They'd almost been caught, and that was a reminder of just how much danger they were in. Lyara was still looking out the window, her face pale, but her eyes seemed more determined than ever. "We're going to find Sci-fi, Lyara," Iran said, trying to steady his voice. "No matter what happens, we'll get you back to your people." Lyara nodded quietly, her fingers gripping the seat tightly. "I don't know what to expect," she said, her voice tinged with both hope and uncertainty. "But I have to know. I have to know if any of us survived." Iran could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else too, a spark of hope. She was no longer just running away from danger. She was running toward something, toward answers, toward her past, and Iran was going to be there every step of the way. As the stars outside the window streaked past them, Iran's mind raced with possibilities. What would they find on Sci-fi? And if there were survivors, what kind of world awaited them? He didn't know, but he knew one thing for sure. Their journey had only just begun. They were heading into the unknown, and nothing would stop them from uncovering the truth. The journey to Sephora was long and filled with tension. Every day on the ship, Iran could feel the weight of what they were doing pressing down on him. They had escaped the immediate danger, but there was no telling what awaited them on the lost planet. What if there was nothing left? What if the survivors were long gone, or worse, turned into something they couldn't recognize? Still, Iran couldn't back down. He had promised Lyara that he would help her find the truth, and he wasn't going to let her down now. Lyara, on the other hand, seemed both excited and scared. She spent most of her time staring out of the ship's small observation window, gazing at the stars, her mind lost in thoughts of her home. The more she remembered, the more she longed for Sci-fi. The images were clearer now, flashes of her family, the bustling cities, and the deep connection to the energy that flowed through the planet. She had never felt more alive, and yet the memories brought a painful sting. "I don't know what I'll find," Lyara said one evening, her voice quiet but steady. She sat next to Iran in the small cockpit, her eyes distant. "I'm scared, Iran. What if I don't belong anywhere anymore?" Iran looked at her, his heart aching. He knew what she was feeling. She wasn't just an alien girl. She was someone who had lost everything. But now, she had a chance to reclaim it. "You belong with people who understand you, Lyara. And if you find them on Sci-fi, we'll make sure you have a place there. We'll figure this out together." Lyara nodded, though a shadow of doubt remained in her eyes. "I hope you're right." As the ship neared Sci-fi's coordinates, the atmosphere grew tense. They had been traveling for what seemed like days, and the closer they got to the planet, the more the quiet weight of anticipation filled the air. The star map indicated that Sci-fi was a dying planet, its resources drained, its atmosphere barely stable. Iran wasn't sure what they were walking into, but it was a place that had been forgotten by most. The history of Sci-fi was nothing more than a legend to most people across the galaxy. Then, the moment came. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere, the sight before them was breathtaking and heartbreaking all at once. The once vibrant world now lay in ruins, a ghost of its former self. The vast forests and fields that Lyra had described were now nothing but barren landscapes, scattered with wreckage and dust. The cities that had stood tall, shimmering with life and technology, were now in ruin, their glass towers cracked and broken. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as the ship hovered above the landscape. She could see the remnants of the world she had once known. This is Sci-fi," she whispered, her voice shaking. Iran reached over, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He didn't know what to say. There were no words to comfort someone who had lost so much. The ship landed in an area that appeared to be the outskirts of an ancient city, though the buildings here were barely standing. As they stepped outside, the air was thin and dry, and the ground beneath their feet was cracked, as if the planet itself was slowly dying. The wind howled softly, carrying with it a strange, eerie energy that sent shivers down Iran's spine. Lyra closed her eyes, taking in a deep breath, trying to sense something. Anything. She raised her hand, her fingers trembling as she reached for the energy that once connected her to this place. But all she could feel was emptiness, a hollow echo. "I thought I would feel more," she said, her voice barely audible. "I thought there would be something here, something to guide me." Iran could see the pain on her face. She had come here hoping for answers, but instead, she was met with the harsh reality of what her home had become. "We'll find something, Lyra. Maybe the answers aren't in the ruins. Maybe they're hidden somewhere else." As the two of them ventured further into the abandoned city, Iran's mind raced. There had to be something here, some sign of life, some clue as to what happened to the Cypherans. He wasn't ready to give up yet, but the more they explored, the more the feeling of isolation grew. This place was forgotten by the galaxy, and perhaps forgotten by time itself. Yet, Iran knew that if there was anyone left to find, it would be Lyra who would lead them to the answers. And so, they pressed forward, determined to uncover whatever remained of Sci-fi. The ruins of Sci-fi stretched out before Iran and Lyra, like a haunting memory. Each step they took deeper into the dead city, revealing more devastation. There were no sounds of life, no signs of survivors, only the wind that whispered through the broken streets and the distant rumble of the planet's dying core. The more they walked, the heavier the silence grew. Iran could feel Lyra's discomfort, her once hopeful expression now clouded with confusion and sorrow. "This place, it was beautiful once, wasn't it?" Lyra's voice cracked as she spoke, her silver eyes scanning the remnants of a once thriving city. The beauty of Sci-fi seemed almost impossible to believe now. It was hard for her to reconcile the images in her mind of tall, shining towers and lush forests with the desolate landscape that lay before them. Iran squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, it was. But whatever happened here, it's not your fault. You weren't the one who destroyed it." Lyra nodded, but the sadness in her eyes didn't fade. They continued walking, moving through what was left of the city, and after a while, they came across something unexpected. A hidden entrance. It was a small, almost unnoticeable door, half covered in the debris of fallen buildings. The markings on the door were strange, symbols Lyra didn't recognize, but there was something about it that called to her. "This looks different," Lyra said quietly, reaching out to touch the door. Her fingers tingled as she made contact with it, a soft hum running through her body. For a brief moment, she felt the energy she had once known, a distant connection that seemed to reach out from the depths of the planet itself. Iran noticed the change in her. "Lyra, are you okay?" I think this is it," she said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and apprehension. "This door, it's part of what I've been looking for." Without another word, Lyra pushed against the door. It creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow passageway that led deep underground. The air was cooler here, and a faint glow emanated from further down the corridor, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Iran's instincts told him to be cautious, but Lyra seemed drawn to it. Her curiosity and hope outweighed her fear. He didn't want to hold her back. "Let's go," he said, his voice firm. They entered the passage, the door shutting quietly behind them. The tunnel was narrow, and the further they walked, the more the glow grew stronger. Eventually, they reached a large chamber, its walls lined with strange, shimmering crystals. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it, a glowing orb. It pulsed with an energy that made the hair on the back of Iran's neck stand up. Liara stepped forward, her silver eyes locked onto the orb. "This is it," she whispered, almost reverently. "This is what I've been waiting for. It's part of our technology, part of Sutfora's power. It's what connects everything." Iran stood behind her, watching as she reached out to touch the orb. His heart raced. He had no idea what this would mean for Liara, but he knew it was important. He didn't speak, afraid to break the moment. As her fingers made contact with the orb, the room seemed to come alive. The crystals began to hum, and the air was thick with energy. A low, mechanical sound echoed through the chamber, and suddenly, the walls shifted, revealing hidden compartments that had been concealed for centuries. A holographic map appeared in front of Liara, displaying coordinates that Iran couldn't understand. "This is it," Liara murmured. "The key to everything. These coordinates, they're the last place where my people are. I can feel it." Iran's heart skipped a beat. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. But it also meant they weren't alone anymore. Liara wasn't the only one left. Her people, some of them, were out there, waiting to be found. Before Iran could respond, the walls trembled, and the ground beneath them shook. A deep rumble sounded from somewhere far below, and Liara's face grew pale. "What's happening?" Iran asked, grabbing her arm. "I don't know," Liara said, her voice filled with panic. "But whatever it is, it's not good. We need to leave. Now." The orb's glow dimmed, and the sound of crumbling stone echoed through the chamber as the walls began to close in. They had uncovered the secret of Sci-fi, but they had no idea what consequences awaited them. The planet was dying, and it seemed that whatever force had destroyed it was still active. "We have to get out of here," Iran said urgently. Together, they turned and sprinted toward the exit, the tremors growing more intense with each step. The final secrets of Sci-fi were no longer hidden, but now they had to survive the danger they had unleashed. The ground beneath Iran and Liara shook violently as they ran, their footsteps pounding on the stone floor of the crumbling chamber. The walls seemed to close in on them, the once stable tunnel now collapsing with each passing second. Aaron grabbed Liara's hand, pulling her faster as the sound of cracking stone echoed around them. He had no idea what had triggered the reaction from the orb, but he knew one thing for sure: they needed to get out before it was too late. "Liara, we have to move," Aaron shouted over the rumbling, his voice barely audible above the noise. His heart raced as they rounded a corner, the exit just ahead, but the passageway was narrowing. The tunnel was collapsing, and they were running out of time. "I'm right behind you," Liara gasped, her breath coming in short bursts. She was shaken, but her determination never wavered. The map, the coordinates, she had found them. But now was not the time to focus on what they meant. Survival was their only priority. Iran could feel the heat from the collapsing tunnel as chunks of rock began to fall from above. They were getting closer to the exit, but the walls seemed to close in around them, blocking their way. A massive piece of stone fell just ahead of them, cutting off their path. "No," Liara cried out, her voice cracking with fear. "We're trapped." Iran's mind raced. They had to think fast, or they wouldn't make it out alive. He looked around, searching for another way out, but the tunnel was falling apart. The only thing left to do was to try to clear the debris and make it through the small opening ahead. "Stay close," Iran said, his voice low and steady despite the panic he felt inside. He grabbed a loose piece of rubble and threw it aside, creating just enough room for them to slip through. Liara squeezed through first, and Aaron followed closely behind, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment they were through, they found themselves outside, standing on the edge of the ruined city. The sky was dark, the clouds swirling in a way that made it look like a storm was brewing. Behind them, the entrance to the tunnel collapsed completely, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Aaron took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. They had made it out, but for how long? The danger was far from over. Liara was still shaken, but she managed to look at Aaron, her silver eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Aaron smiled faintly, though he didn't have time for words. They couldn't stay here. The planet was falling apart, and they still had a mission to complete. "We're not safe yet," Aaron said, scanning the horizon. "We need to get to the coordinates, Liara. We need to find the survivors." Liara nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "You're right. Whatever happens, I won't stop until I find them." With a new sense of purpose, the two of them began their journey across the desolate landscape. The remnants of Sci-fi were everywhere, but there was still hope. The map had led them to this point, and now it was up to them to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. As they moved forward, Liara could feel the pull of the coordinates in her mind. They were close. Her people, what was left of them, were waiting. But as they walked, the planet seemed to react to their presence. The ground trembled beneath their feet again, and the air grew heavy with the same energy they had felt in the underground chamber. Aaron stopped, his hand on Liara's arm. "Do you feel that?" he asked. Liara nodded, her face pale. "Something's happening. It's like the planet knows we're here." Suddenly, a bright light flared in the distance. The ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a hidden structure deep below. It was massive, ancient, and it pulsed with an energy that felt alive, more alive than the planet itself. "This is it," Liara whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is the heart of Sci-fi." Aaron stared at the structure, his heart racing. It wasn't just the last hope for Liara. It was the last hope for them all. But as they approached, they knew they were on the verge of the greatest revelation of their lives. The secrets of Sci-fi and the future of Liara's people were waiting just beyond the threshold. It was a new beginning, one that would change everything.